So, Lone Rider here, and I'm out here in the woods just chilling this morning. You can see the Passaic River has flooded, unfortunately. Um, but I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the X-Files. I was a huge X-Files fan going back, the first season. So half my life, since the 1990s, 20 years, over 20 years. And I was really looking forward to them bringing it back when they, in 2016, hey, let's have a continuation. And like a lot of fans, I was really looking forward to it. I was also a little skeptical. I said to myself, could you really make a show like that today, right? When there's a tendency to, worry about offending people, when there's a tendency to inject politics into everything, when there's a tendency to just, I don't know, it seems that people don't tell the same kind of good stories anymore. And I guess I was right, because season 10, the 2016 attempt, was it was incredibly disappointing. The acting was bad, the characters seemed out of character, the writing was, they rehashed a lot of old story ideas, but they didn't really add anything to it. They basically just, did it worse than before. In some cases, they broke continuity. The episode Home Again, the villain was supposed to be a tulpa, or a Tibetan thought form killer, and of course, in the episode Arcadia, which was an original series fan favorite, there was a tulpa as the villain already. But in this case, they not only did they rehash the same idea essentially, they actually had Mulder break continuity when he said there's no such thing. It's a mistranslation. But wait a minute, in the original series, you and your partner were almost killed by a tulpa. So did they just forget they made that episode? And it was downhill from there. You had, the episode Babylon, the so-called terrorism episode, was notoriously bad. But ironically enough, what people were criticizing it most for, an apparently anti-Muslim vibe, actually wasn't the problem with the episode. It was just poorly written. The humor was forced. The doppelganger agent lookalikes were just ugh. And then you had Mulder's magical mushroom tour, which was, and then of course they basically broke the character of Dana Scully's continuity when they had her, of all people, defend fundamentalist Islam with that throwaway PC line, not all Muslims are terrorists. First of all, it's insulting to say that to the intelligence of your viewers. I would argue it's also potentially insulting to Muslims. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're going to have anybody say that, why have it be a character that has a hostility towards fundamentalist religions? I mean, Agent Scully, nobody remembers her reaction to the snake handling church and Signs and Wonders in the original series. Talk about breaking continuity. So yeah, the season 10 was pretty bad, poorly written, overly politicized, just not good X-Files. So I never saw season 11, but I made the mistake recently of reading about it. And they say some things you can't unsee. Well, some things you can't unread. And now I'm actually kind of glad I didn't actually see it, from what I read. Apparently they spent several episodes just bashing Trump and Republicans, which, I don't care whether you think, the current president, whether you like him or whether you think he's a doofus or whether you just don't have an opinion one way or the other. Does that belong in an X-Files episode? What does that add to the story? Now, you could say in that story it belonged, but yeah, they basically wrote that story so that they would have an opportunity to put that in there. It's like, what's the point of writing a whole episode just to have a couple lame-o, political snipes, right? I mean, the X-Files, the original series, was known for telling good stories, and yes, they occasionally touched on political themes, but it was good stories first. And whenever they touched on a political theme, they never made it divisive. They never made it, left, right, Democrat, Republican. They never made it partisan. I mean, you can go back to the first season episode, Darkness Falls. It dealt with both logging and eco-terrorism, and it managed to, deal with it without taking sides and without beating people over the damn head. And I watched that episode. I never thought, oh, this is a political episode. I just thought this is an episode of the X-Files. That's a damn good one. And we don't have that anymore. They took that away from us. Another thing is the original episodes were sort of timeless because they didn't tie themselves down to narrow political events or something that's going to be dated in a few years. Could you imagine if the original 9 seasons of somewhere in there they had thrown in overt references to Clinton or Bush or their politics or supporters or whatever? People would be watching an episode from 1993 in 2018 and be like, what's that about? like who are these people? Why should we care, right? And that's the thing. I can watch an episode from 1993 and it's as relevant now as it was then because they didn't try to tie it down to a narrow political moment or issue or personality. These episodes, even if the writing would hold up and the acting and the storytelling, which of course it won't, but even in other words, even if there was a reason to want to watch these episodes, 20 years from now, the way people watch the original ones, the way I still watch the original ones, if somebody did, they would either spend all their time laughing or groaning about the overt politicking because it would be like, oh yeah, that's so 20 years ago, and then there's of course the fact that you're potentially offending part of your fan base. Because the show was never overtly partisan in the past, it could appeal to a variety of views. And when it did touch on things like the issues of government accountability and nobody being above the law, it did so in a general way, a way that I think everybody, whether they are to the left or the right, could agree on, at least back then. And so it appealed to people who were of a libertarian bent, people who were so-called liberals or to the left, people who might be slightly conservative, people who might actually be conservative. It appealed to people across the spectrum, and it had a wider appeal because it didn't align itself with a particular partisan view, and it didn't take pot shots at everybody else. And I think the two things are different. It's one thing to advocate a view. It's another thing to deride people who don't subscribe to that view. And unfortunately, these new X-Files episodes apparently did both. So, not only did you risk alienating people who don't subscribe to that view, you also specifically sought, it's not just that if people don't want those politics in their X-Files episodes, you're going to tick them off. It's that they specifically went out of their way to belittle people. Yeah, that's really how you maintain an audience. And then there's the fact that the theme of the show was, two brave people with differing approaches, differing philosophies, differing backgrounds, who were brave enough to think for themselves and not be tied down to the political whims of the moment or to the prevailing view. In other words, they thought for themselves and they questioned, right? Mulder was notorious for this. Actually, one of the lines he said in the early series was one of my favorite lines, which I still use today, which is, you ask an impertinent question and you're on your way to a pertinent answer. But apparently, characters that originally had the guts to question, had the guts to ask impertinent questions, now are like weather vanes, and they go along with whatever the political trend of the moment is. So not only did they put politics in there in such a way that it ties it down to a narrow political moment in time, and it's going to make it seem dated in a few years. Not only did they spend more time on that, apparently, than good storytelling, not only did they risk offending half of their audience and then specifically seek to belittle them, but they also undermined the main characters, and in doing so, the entire program and its premise. The premise was two people who were brave enough to think for themselves, so now they've been turned into basically, weather vanes tilting with the political whims of the moment. Way to undermine the basic premise of the entire thing, right? Because it's not just that they put politics in there. What the politics they put in there is the prevailing orthodoxy of our time. Right? It would be one thing if they put politics in there that questioned. But no, they put politics in there that are the exact same thing you'll see if you turn on CNN, MSNBC, whatever. And it's like, okay, so whatever happened to these two brave people that were willing to think for themselves and question the established orthodoxy? Where are they? I don't know where they are. Maybe they were abducted by some of the X-Files original aliens, the ones that were actually like badass and interesting, because they're not on the show anymore. They're not doing their thing anymore. I don't know who these two people are, but they're not Mulder and Scully. And that's another thing to think of, right? Not everybody who objected to these political characterizations and to the over-politicalization of season 11, and to some degree season 10, are doing so because they don't share those politics. Not everybody who takes issue with this is a guy wearing a Trump hat. For a lot of us, whatever our politics, it's just that we don't want these kind of politics in the X-Files. That what made the show great was that it was willing to tackle potentially political themes, but it was never overtly partisan. That what made the show great was that anybody could relate to it and see it through their own eyes. That what made the show great was it was about the big picture, literally, big grandiose issues like what's the nature of the universe, and is there life on other planets, and unraveling mysteries. And it was about that big picture seen through the eyes of two brave people who were willing to literally think for themselves. So now, of course, they're just mouthpieces for the same idea you would hear from, like I said, CNN, MSNBC, whatever. And it's like, what? I don't know about you. I turn to my entertainment to get away from mundane, everyday crap, right? I don't watch the X-Files or the Adventures of the Starship Enterprise or read a murder mystery novel because I want to be berated by, the same kind of talking heads I might actually change the channel on if they appeared on my TV. And I read an interesting quote of, I can't remember who said it, but it was to the effect that the culture is where you live, right? Politics, economics, these things affect your life, but most of us don't spend time immersed in them for recreation. I mean, some people might, I guess, if you're like a fan of C-SPAN or something, but, I don't know about you. When I want to relax at the end of a day, I pick up a good book. I pop in a DVD of the X-Files and watch The Adventures of Mulder and Scully. I watch a film. I don't sit there and watch, congressional hearings for relaxation. Nor do I listen to somebody lecture me and berate me. So when that stuff works its way into the entertainment, it sort of does a disservice to the entertainment. And in particular, when you're talking about a show like The X-Files, where the whole premise was questioning established orthodoxies, to then have those characters represent the orthodoxy of the moment, it really undercuts everything. And, frankly, it's not a surprise. I was reading that Gillian Anderson, the actress who portrays Dana Scully, made a statement to the effect that they've lost something like 70% of the viewers. I don't know how accurate that figure is. Maybe they were just talking about like the premiere episode. But I'm going to be honest, I'm not watching any of the new stuff, and I won't going forward. To quote a line from a season 1 X-Files episode, I believe it was the episode Ice, it all stops right here, right now. I was a fan of this show for 20 years, and I supported it, and it's kind of sad when fans like me who've got this thing to where it is and been rooting for it for almost a quarter century, now we're basically told, piss off, your views don't matter. Not necessarily our political views, but our views about not wanting this overt politicking in the X-Files, one way or the other, whether we agree with it or not. And our views that maybe they should spend a little more time, if they spent less time politicking and more time actually writing better stories, not for nothing. And instead, it's like, okay, you've supported the program for 20 years, you rooted for the characters, and now piss off, right? We don't want your support. And it's like it's a sad thing when your childhood heroes tell you to go piss off. And the characters of Mulder and Scully weren't just entertainment; they were heroes. There have been times in my own life when we were working for Mountain Bike Access and watching Reservation. Part of that was figuring out the origin of the policy, and I remember sometime after I was filing my 5th or 6th Open Public Record Act request and getting stonewalled by the government, sitting there saying to myself, why am I doing this? Is it worth it? I want bike access as a cyclist. As a citizen, I want fair government policy, but I'm busting my ass here for what, right? And as corny as it sounds, I turned in my mind to that line from season 1 X-Files episode Fallen Angel, where Mulder says, and no government agency has jurisdiction over the truth. And it helped. Sometimes, there's a message in fictional characters and fictional stories that we can draw on, right? And people need that. People need heroes. People need examples. So what happens is you take those heroes and you turn them into, I don't know what, but again, it's not the X-Files that I grew up with, and I would argue it's not the X-Files, period. And it's just, to me, it's. I honestly don't know what they're doing. What is interesting is if you read people's comments on articles on the subject where they're talking about this, and whenever anybody criticizes the poor writing, the bad acting, the overt politicking of the new X-Files, if you want to call them, quote unquote, it's always like, well, you don't count because you're a Trump supporter, go bug off. It's like, the question isn't whether you're a Trump supporter. The question isn't whether you agree with the views of the overt politicking. The question is, does that overt politicking make for a better story, make for a timeless story, make for a story that people will be able to watch in 20 years and relate to? In other words, the issue isn't that some people might not agree with the politics, that some people might be, let's say, Trump supporters. The issue is that those people, whatever their political views, are X-Files fans, and they don't want the X-Files ruined. And I got to say, too late, I'm going to continue to enjoy the original episodes, but I'm going to be honest, when I first heard what they did when I saw season 10, I was really disappointed. I kept watching, hoping it would get better. It didn't. When I heard what they did with season 11, I honestly thought about setting my DVD collection on fire. And I'm not one of those guys walking around with a Trump hat. Do I hate him? No. Personally, do I like the man? Do I think is an admirable human being? Not really. I mean, to me, he doesn't seem not to have, a great way of conducting himself. His rhetoric is not the best. His policies, honestly, I don't have as much problems with his policies as I have with the man. But let me put it this way. That's not the issue. The issue isn't, what your politics are. The issue is that you don't want this kind of overt politicking and divisiveness in the X-Files. You want a story that isn't tied down and limited to one narrow political moment in time. You want them to spend that effort maybe actually telling good stories that people will still want to watch in 20 years, rather than this crap. And here's something else to think about. Everybody who defends the overt politicking defends it by saying, well, Trump is awful and Trump supporters are awful, so because this was deriding them, it's okay. They don't defend it based on what it adds to the story. They don't defend it as entertainment. They don't defend it in terms of the X-Files itself. They defend it only in reference to the external political environment, a political environment which will probably be very different in 20 years. In other words, they're not defending this as a story. They're defending this as an editorial. And it's interesting that they can't reference anything in the X-Files' own universe, in its own fictional context, to explain why this should have been done. It would be one thing if they said, well, you look at the history of the characters and this and that. And nope. Any defense at all they make is in terms of, well, I agree with the political message and its relationship to events in the real world. But we're not talking about the real world. We're talking about a fictional program involving aliens and conspiracies and monsters and yetis and transmigration of the soul. We're talking about a science fiction program. And it is interesting if you want to look at this and say, I respect Chris Carter and all the other people involved in the X-Files. I respect their right to have their political beliefs, whether I agree with them or not. But I also wish that they would respect their creation enough to be like, let's not take a program that has stood the test of time and ruin it because we want to show how down we are with whatever the political whims of the moment are, right? With whatever people, whatever the cool kids are doing now. And if that had been their guiding philosophy in the 1990s, the show would never have made it to today, right? It wouldn't have made it through 9 seasons, plus whatever these last 2 jokes were. And so anyway, I'm an X-Files fan, and my problem with the overt politicking as well as with the poor story writing, my problem isn't that my opinion on the politics. Whether I agree with that or disagree with that is irrelevant. I'm not taking issue with this because I wear a Trump hat. I don't. I'm taking issue with this because I'm an X-Files fan, and I don't want to see the X-Files ruined in order to have like one teeny tiny moment of political relevancy that the X-Files didn't actually have to change itself to achieve, because it's never been non-relevant. Themes like government accountability and no one being above the law and decisions shouldn't be made in secret, as general themes, these could be applied to any time period in history. Instead, they tried to make it really narrow and really smug and really divisive. And, maybe they should have spent all that time and effort on telling better stories, right? And, as an X-Files fan, I'm going to try to enjoy the original 9 seasons. As far as I'm concerned, continuity stops at the end of season 9. But it's going to be hard, knowing where these characters that I respected and looked up to, what they ended up being, made into. And, like I said, it's really hard when, you support something for 20 years, you believe in something for 20 years, you enjoy something for 20 years, and then the people behind that tell you to go piss off, you don't count anymore. And like I said, it's interesting that the people defending it, defending this current iteration, can only defend it in reference to current politics. They can't defend it in reference to the artistic merits of the fiction itself. Because, let's face it, that's what's going to matter in 20 years. In 20 years, people might be like, Trump who? But, the X-Files, will still be out there in some form, on some media, and people will still, face the issue of, do I want to watch this? And like I said, I can watch an episode from 1993, and it's relevant today, and I enjoy it today. These new episodes, even if somebody could get past the lame writing and the bad storytelling and the just hackneyed acting, it's going to just seem so dated and so out of place. And, it's very strange. It's very strange, and it's very sad. And, I wish... I guess I just wish that the people behind the show had as much respect for their creation as some of us fans do, right? It's their show. They can do whatever they want with it. But at the same time, like I said, it's pretty sad when you support something for 20 years and you help get it to where it is today, and then you're told, go bug off. And by producing X-Files episodes, quote unquote, of this quality, what they really have said to longtime fans of the show is go bug off. And I think it's particularly interesting, by the way, that the some of the reviews I read were saying things like, well, if you didn't like the original X-Files or you couldn't get into it, you'll definitely like these episodes. And it's interesting because they inadvertently hit the nail on the head. One, these aren't X-Files episodes, not in the sense the original ones were. They don't have the quality, the suspense, the acting, the writing, but also they're not written to appeal to people based on their merits as X-Files episodes, based on the storytelling, based on the characters. They're written to appeal to people based on the lowest political emotions. And that seems to be the selling point. Maybe the reason the storytelling is so poor is they figured, hey, we're hitting all the boxes and ticking all the boxes for all the cool kids, so we don't have to try to make a good story. People will watch it just because we're signaling that we think correctly. And that's just lazy writing, if you ask me. So I'm a huge X-Files fan. I love the original 9 seasons, especially the early episodes, it must be said. But as far as I'm concerned, the X-Files is dead. And poor writing, poor storytelling, poor acting, and poorly chosen politicking have killed it. And now they're saying, well, Gillian Anderson is leaving the show, and there's no plans to make any more. Gee, I wonder why. They say viewership is down. I wonder why. Right? Well, when you tell all the fans that have been with you for 20 years, go bug off, what do you think is going to happen? So, Lone Rider, longtime Exiles fan, signing off.